Well, good morning, everyone. This is George Spees for the Pennsylvania Office of Open Records. It's great to see everyone here this morning so we can talk about the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act, or what else is commonly referred to as the Open Meetings Law. Um, a couple preliminaries before we dive into the subject. First, I want to tell you that this session is being recorded, and the recordings are available within a couple days, posted to the OOR's website. The URL for that is on your screen right now, openrecords.pa.gov, and you're welcome to refer to that, or download it as you feel necessary. Possibly one of your colleagues or friends couldn't attend today, so they can hear what we're talking about just by going to the website and playing the recording. Um, if you've ever participated in one of these webinars before, it's basically a PowerPoint presentation with me talking in the background. The PowerPoints are also available on the website. You go to the training tab, scroll down, and you'll find all of the PowerPoints that we use for our training sessions. And again, same conditions apply. You can download those, use them as you see fit, whether it be for someone who may have missed this morning's session. Maybe you just need it for your own future reference, or possibly you're conducting your own localized training. And we consider them public records, so you're more than welcome to use them as you deem necessary. Uh, let's talk about questions. If, as we're going through the presentation, if you have a question, you can type it in the chat feature, and I will do my best to answer your questions live as we're going through the presentation. But I have two conditions. First is that we are talking about the Sunshine Act, so let's stay on topic. And secondly, which is probably more important, is that if you can keep your questions as succinct and brief as possible, it's a big help for me. Sometimes people will type in a bunch of paragraphs, and it's just difficult and awkward for me to sit here and read through all of that, and while everyone else is waiting patiently with the dead air going on. If it looks like you've got something unusually complex or maybe specific to your situation, hey, we'll do one of two things. We'll wait until the end of the presentation, and I'll come back to it, or we'll take the conversation offline. The contact information for our office is on the screen right now. When you reach out to us, whether it be through email or a phone call, first it comes to our administrative staff, who are pretty well versed on the Right to Know law and the Sunshine Act. They can usually get you headed in the right direction, but if you happen to stump them, then your request will get escalated up to one of the senior executives, and they're pretty good about getting back to you within a day. So like I said, we'll get you headed in the right direction. We can't provide legal advice. It's just, not our thing, but we can point you towards a legal precedent where the facts are usually very similar to whatever situation you're dealing with. And like I keep saying, we'll try and get you headed in the right direction from there. But feel free to reach out to us if you do have any questions at any time. We do our best to help out. And I think those of you who have can attest to that. Okay, so let's dive in and talk about the Sunshine Act. And first, we want to know just, why it's important. Like I said, it's also commonly referred to as the Open Meetings Law, but I want to just quote out of the preamble to the law, and bear with me here, but the Sunshine Act involves the right of the public to be present at all meetings of agencies and to witness the deliberation, policy formulation, and decision making of those agencies. And it's vital because secrecy in public affairs undermines the faith of the public in government and the public's effectiveness in fulfilling its role in a democratic society. Okay, very altruistic statements here. But for those of you who may have traveled to different countries and so forth, this is a unique facet of our democracy here in America. And Pennsylvania is at the forefront of ensuring that the public has a right to know what its public officials are up to. And it's required that any deliberation between public officials and any decision making between public officials occur in an open setting where the public can observe, the public can comment, and have firsthand knowledge as to what's going on. So there, I like to describe it as a three-legged stool. When someone calls into the office and they have questions about, potential violation of the Sunshine Act, or, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe an agency is calling in. And when we use the term agency, we're talking about state agencies, but we're also referring to municipal entities as well. So that could be cities, boroughs, townships, authorities created by statute, school districts as an extension of school districts. We're talking about public charter schools and the like. So, agency, that term is used in a generic setting here. But, the point being that, people from agencies will call in and they'll ask, how do we do this? How do we ensure that we're not in violation, or we're thinking about adopting this practice? Do you think that will be okay? And, we like to approach the Sunshine Act as a three-legged stool. There are 3 points that we want to make sure are being adhered to. Now, there are other nuances of the law that obviously come into play, and we need to be concerned about those. But let's talk about, and this is what we'll talk about during the presentation, the 3 legs of this stool. First offhand, has the agency or is the agency providing advance notice of the fact that a meeting is occurring? And when they do that, are they explaining how someone attends? Now, historically, that would be where and when is the meeting occurring. But with the advent of online technology and virtual meetings occurring using internet platforms and the like, are there instructions, are there links on how I would sign in so that I can observe the meeting? Which brings us to the second point. Is there an opportunity for the public to observe the deliberations that are taking place? And that word deliberations has a specific definition that we'll be talking about. And then thirdly, is the public afforded the opportunity to comment on decisions prior to those decisions actually being made? And again, the word decision has a very specific definition in the context of the Sunshine Act. I might as well get into this now. And those of you who have attended other webinars are probably familiar with this. But my take is that whenever you want to understand a piece of legislation, a law, you can read through the law, and depending on when it was written, who wrote it, what it's about, and so forth, it can sometimes be hard to understand. Legalese is in there. Occasionally, you will come across language that, from your perspective, is vague. Sometimes you'll think that there's a conflict between certain provisions within a law. I always recommend going to the definition section of a law. And so many times that will provide clarity as to the intent of the law, what specific words mean, how they're applied, how you interpret them, and the like. Okay, it's just a good practice so that you get a clear understanding. Oftentimes it can clear up that vagueness that you might notice, or that apparent conflict, because of the way definitions are written and how they shine light on the intent of the law and so forth. Okay, so let's dive into this a little deeper, and we want to answer the question, who is covered by the Sunshine Act? Well, we mentioned agencies in that definition earlier. So we read the law itself, and there's a phrase in there about how it applies to any state or local government body and all committees. And you'll see that we have committees italicized there. This is because oftentimes the question will come up, is this committee subject to the Sunshine Act, when they meet? I should say when they gather, because again, the word meeting has a specific definition as well. And there's a lot of misunderstanding. Still to this day, it surprises me that people think that Okay, in order for a meeting to be public, there needs to be a quorum of elected officials present. Okay, I want to clarify that that is not accurate. What is accurate is that if the gathering of this committee is performing an essential government function and exercising authority to take official action, okay, there could be a committee without any public officials on it. And if they are performing these other elements, it could end up being a public meeting. Okay, you do not need a quorum of public officials, elected officials, present to determine whether or not a gathering falls under the auspices of the Sunshine Act. Okay, we're looking at what is the committee responsible for, how does it operate, and so forth. Okay. Question has popped up. Is a volunteer fire department considered a local agency and subject to the Sunshine Act and right to know law? Yes and no. Okay. It's a very good question. Unfortunately, when it comes to the Sunshine Act, you would need to take a look at the nexus between that volunteer fire department and the local municipality. And the same exists for the right to know law. With the right to know law, there's actually case law that supports it. And it's on a case-by-case basis because of the different relationships that volunteer fire departments have with their local municipalities as we go across the Commonwealth. You can have some volunteer fire departments that are completely independent, and the only nexus would be the document that gives them the authority to put out fires. That's within that jurisdiction. Then you have other volunteer fire departments that are essentially uh, a part of the municipal organization. For instance, where I live in York County, the next municipality over, the volunteer fire department, um, all of their administrative functions are done by the municipality. Okay, if they want to buy something, they have to get a purchase order. Okay, so yeah, the Walt has kindly put up some of the case law, or one of the cases that gives some information for that. Our and I don't want to get into the weeds here, but our appeals officers actually have a checklist that they go down. Uh, Alexis, the Sunshine Law. Well, let me answer the first question. There's a checklist that our appeals officers used in the context of the right to know law to determine whether or not a volunteer fire company is subject to the right to know law. There is no such thing with the Sunshine Act because we'll get into enforcement, and it usually comes down to, with volunteer fire companies in particular, it would come down to your county court of common pleas. Basically, it's the answer is no, but it's well, I think the more accurate answer, unfortunately, is it depends. All right, there's just a lot of factors that the court would need to take a look at. Okay, the Sunshine Law itself is on our website. Okay, and you can download it for free and have a look at it there. You'll find it under the tab for the Sunshine Act. Okay, so take a look there. That's where you'll find the link. All right, let's get back to who is covered. I can tell this is going to be a long session, but that's okay. I'm here for the duration. Okay, so you can have a gathering of a committee without any elected officials on it, and it could be subject to the Sunshine Act. You do not need a quorum of public officials. You do not need any public officials present for a committee meeting for it to possibly be subject to jurisdiction of the Sunshine Act. You would need to determine first, is it performing an essential government function? Okay, what are we talking about here? What's an essential government function? Best I can do is give you an example that I like to use, and it's the girls softball team. Let's say you've got a township where the local girls softball team has won the state championship. and the supervisors appoint an ad hoc committee. We want to have a celebration. We want to have a parade. We want them to come back to the township park, and we're going to have a barbecue, and we're going to honor the efforts of this team. Okay. Now, that's a very laudable thing to do, and getting a state championship is certainly a notable accomplishment. But can you successfully argue that it's an essential government function? I doubt it. Okay. So chances are gatherings of that ad hoc committee to plan the celebration would not be subject to the Sunshine Act because it does not involve an essential government function. But let's change it up a little bit. Let's say that that same township has a standing committee where on an annual basis, they meet to review all the local ordinances to make sure that the language makes sense, that it doesn't conflict with any state or federal ordinances or statutes, that it's still relevant to the operations of local government, and they make recommendations back to the elected officials as to, any ordinances that need to be modified, perhaps some that we need to consider adopting, perhaps some that we should get rid of because they're no longer relevant. Okay. That is actually part of code. And it would be, I think you could argue there that that is an essential government function, that local government ensure that all of its ordinances are up to date and appropriate. Okay, so the gatherings of that particular committee would more than likely be subject to the Sunshine Act. And you would have to go through all of the exercises that the Sunshine Act dictates. Now, I use the term making recommendations, okay? And this goes back to those definitions within the Sunshine Act. Okay, first offhand, next we need to determine, does the committee exercise authority to take official action? And we go to the definition section, and sure enough, there's a definition for what is official action, and it includes the term making recommendations. So if you have a committee that's turning around and making recommendations to the elected officials on matters that are an essential government function, you've made the connection, okay? You've come full circle now, and you understand why the gatherings of that committee that's making recommendations would thus be open to public scrutiny as dictated by the Sunshine Act. Okay, you've met these three factors. This is looking at what the law actually says. Okay, and I see we have some more comments. Okay, everybody's just helping out with putting references to the Clymer decision. Now, understand that these decisions that are being cited here, these citations involve the right to know law. There's very little case law when it comes to the Sunshine Act. Okay, so don't get confused by reading these decisions, because you're going to find they are in the context of the right to know law, which we're not talking about today. We're talking about the Sunshine Act. Right to know law involves access to public records. Sunshine Act involves access to public meetings. Okay, just so we're making that distinction. We don't want anyone to be misled by some of the comments here and the references, although I think it's great that you guys are helping each other out with the comments. Okay, so let's now dive deeper into this as to who is covered. And again, we're going to talk about committees. And it so happens that there is case law available. And years ago, the Pennsylvania, I believe it's the Commonwealth Court, had a ruling that took a deep dive into whether or not a committee, and the case was Ristow versus Casey. Casey being Governor Robert Casey, a couple decades ago. And the question was, were the committee meetings subject to the Sunshine Act? The court provided some very useful language. So I want to dive into that decision and talk about some of the factors that the court used in determining its decision. Okay, and the first question that they asked was, does the committee have decision-making authority? And you're sitting out there thinking, well, what appointed committee would not have decision-making authority? Well, there are some times where a body will appoint a committee for information gathering. We don't want you to come back and make any recommendations. We don't want you to make any decisions. We just want you to gather information and give that to us so that we can study it and make our own informed decisions as to any proposed course of action. And then there are some committees that are appointed. Unfortunately, the reality is you just want something to go away. Maybe it's some subject that they don't necessarily consider important, but they've got to take some sort of action on it. We've got to look like we're doing something. So we'll just appoint a committee. And with the expected anticipation that we'll never hear from them again. Okay, we'll give it to a committee and hopefully it'll go away. It'll die on the vine, if you will. And that happens, more than you realize. All right. And then we come to the second point that the court addresses: are the members appointed by the board, meaning the elected officials, and are they authorized to act on its behalf? There are in certain volunteer fire companies, which was mentioned, where there may be appointments initially by the board, but then boards will become self-governing, if you will, or self-perpetuating. I find this more common with public libraries, where a public library, and again, this is the governance of public libraries varies significantly across the state, depending on where you're at. And we look at the relationship between the libraries and the local municipalities, if there's any relationship at all. But you can have a public library where the board was kind of self-appointed, okay? And if there is a vacancy on the board, the library board itself is responsible for going out and finding people to fill the vacancy. There is no authority exercised by the local officials in who they appoint. Okay, and that nexus between the governance of the public library and the governance of the local municipality is non-existent or very weak at all. So we're answering the question, are the members appointed by the board? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, okay? But if they are, then that meets one of the criteria that the court is addressing in Ristow. Then we move to the next question that we have to answer: are the recommendations, and I believe this is probably the most important, are the recommendations made by the committee pursuant to statute, ordinance, or regulatory authority, where the result is the elected officials are enacting laws, policies, or regulations. Okay, and that takes us back to the softball team example. Coming back to the board with recommendations on a celebration is nowhere in statute or any sort of legal authority. You're not going to find a law that says if your girls softball team wins the state championship, you have to have a parade. Okay, it just isn't there. Thus, the gatherings of that ad hoc committee don't rise to the level of satisfying this condition established in Ristow. Okay, you have to be able to make that nexus between what's the committee responsible for, and in the recommendations that they make back to the elected officials, can you connect that to statute? Okay, so that if we go back to the revision of ordinances and so forth, you can find that in law that says this is something you have to do. All right. Now, All that being said, talking about the law itself, talking about Ristow and the discussion in the writings of Ristow versus Casey by the Commonwealth Court, maybe you're still confused. Okay. At this point, I'm going to say if you're unsure whether or not your committee is subject to the provisions of the Sunshine Act, lean towards transparency. And there's two reasons I say that. First, this is the Office of Open Records. I mean, we're responsible for government transparency. So, of course, we're going to say that. Okay. But more importantly, more pragmatic from your point of view, if you're joining us here from the agency side, is you're going to be faced, you could potentially be faced with a complaint that would take you before a judge. And, weigh the odds here, weigh the factors. Opening up your meeting to the public could be inconvenient, okay, because you're going to have to advertise. You may have people there asking questions and commenting and so forth, which, maybe you don't want to do because it's a pain in the neck to have to go through all that. But the alternative is someone files a complaint, and then you have to stand before a judge and perform what I call the straight face test. You have to be able to explain to a judge why you kept the public from observing and commenting on the deliberations that you were making, okay, because of a perceived violation to the Sunshine Act. And if that judge agrees that, in fact, you have violated the Sunshine Act, they have great leeway in the sanctions that they can impose. And you could find yourself being really inconvenienced a lot more than you would have been had you opened up your meeting. So number one, open up your meetings just because it's the right thing to do. Number two, open up your meetings because it could be the smart thing to do in the long run. Okay. All right. Enough said there. Let's talk about whether or not it's a meeting itself. Oh, question has popped up here. Let's say that a community creates its own group to go against the municipality. Are they subject to the Sunshine Law? Well, no, they wouldn't be because they're not a government entity. Okay. They have no jurisdiction relative to the governance of that local municipality. They're simply a citizens advocacy group, if you will. Okay, now we have to answer the question, is it in fact a meeting? We will occasionally get a phone call or an email from someone, hey, I saw 3 township supervisors having breakfast down at the local restaurant the other day. Isn't that illegal? Well, no, it's not. They can get together and have breakfast, okay? There's nothing that says they can't. What they cannot do, though, is talk about township business while they're having breakfast. They can talk about the weather. They can talk about the girls' softball team. They can talk about their families and what they're doing for Christmas and so forth. They just can't talk about any township business while they're gathered there if that represents a quorum of the supervisors board. Okay, so that's the first question that we have to answer relative to this particular topic as to whether it's a meeting. And first offhand, and we go to the definition section and break it down. Is there a quorum? Okay. If not, then, you can't conduct official business if you don't have a quorum present. So if you can't conduct official business, it's not a meeting. Okay. Now, but let's say we're having a public meeting. If you don't have a quorum physically present, it is possible for someone to phone in order to make a quorum, unless you're a borough or a first-class township, okay? Because under the code, the Pennsylvania Borough Code and the Pennsylvania First-Class Township Code, you have to have a quorum physically present in order to conduct a meeting. Now, anyone above that quorum number, okay, they can phone in or, use an online platform. If you are like a second-class township or school district or something like that, you don't need a quorum physically present. First-class township, borough, you do need to be physically present. Anyone above that can phone in, but the connection must be direct, okay? Meaning that you can't have someone acting as a middleman. Anyone present at the meeting needs to be able to hear the person phoning in. The person phoning in needs to be able to hear everyone who's present at the meeting. You can't have someone with a cell phone up to their ear relaying back and forth, okay? So that's necessary. Question has popped up. How can a public person prove what was discussed at breakfast to see if there was Sunshine Act? Well, you can't. You can't prove a negative or disprove a negative. You just have to rely on what they're talking about. Okay, we are an independent state authority. Does our quorum need to be physically present? No, I do not believe it needs to be. You can have potentially virtual meetings, but I do want to address that. Okay, let me continue with this slide, and I want to come back to that, Marissa. Okay, then we need to answer the question. Okay, so I think we've pretty much established the criteria for a quorum being present. Then we need to answer the question, is there deliberation? Okay, what's deliberation? Well, that's any discussion that could, and I use the word could, lead to a decision. So if you're talking about township business, even though you may not plan to make a decision about it, if it could lead to a decision ultimately, that is deliberation, and you cannot deliberate outside of the public eye. So that's where the guys meeting for breakfast could get themselves in trouble if they start talking about township business. Then we answer the question, is there decision making? What does that mean? Go to definitions. Decision making is basically a vote. And it doesn't need to be like, an official per Robert's rules. If there is consensus that this is what we're going to do, that is a de facto vote. And that must occur in front of the public. You cannot do that in private, okay, under any circumstances. So I want to say, add this on to the end here, beware of email meetings. We've just had some elections. The new boards will be seated first of the year, or right after the first of the year. What we have found a lot is that maybe the new members come from a business background, the president, a local businessman or whatever, and he's looking at all this stuff that needs to be done, and he's thinking, well, this we could do this by email. So it'd be a lot more efficient, be a lot quicker. So let's just have an email discussion here, and we'll decide what to do. Unfortunately, that is a violation, or has the potential to be a violation of the Sunshine Act. That deliberation of policy level decisions needs to take place in a public setting. Okay, now two things I want to come back to, and one, I see someone has asked a question and I'm going to address that. Can a second-class township supervisor attend a meeting via Zoom if set up properly for the public? Yes. Okay. Now, what I want to emphasize is that we have participated in hearings with the legislature, and this goes back to immediately post-COVID. There was a kind of a review. Okay, how did the Sunshine Act work during COVID? And the question came up relative to virtual meetings, online meetings. Does anyone need to be physically present in order to have a meeting and still comply with the Sunshine Act? It was the position, or it is the position of our office, that yes, there is language in the Sunshine Act that when you put it all together, it implies that there needs to be a physical presence. And then I go back to those hearings that we testified at. And in direct conversation that I had with legislators in these hearings, so it's part of the legislative record, the legislators more than one, made it quite clear that it is our expectation that citizens have a right to have face-to-face discussions with their elected officials, okay? Not online, not virtual, but face-to-face, a physical presence at the meetings, okay? So don't think that the Sunshine Act allows you to have virtual meetings where the public, like they can observe online, they can comment online, but they cannot be physically present. Okay, you can't do that and comply with the Sunshine Act. Okay, the other thing that I want to emphasize is, yeah, administrative level decisions. Okay, and that addresses Laura's question here. There is a difference between policy level decisions that involve ordinances, legislation, and the like, and then administrative level decisions. Usually, administrative level decisions are those that address issues that are details of what has already been approved in a public setting. Okay, let's say, let me use an example here. At a public meeting, the board approved the expense of $2 million for street paving. Okay. Now it needs to be decided which streets are we going to pave. Okay. The decision has already been made legally in a public setting, the approval of the $2 million expenditure. The administrative level decisions, now which streets are we going to pave? That can occur outside of the public eye. And yes, you can use email meetings to do that. Now, small things like date of our next meeting, Laura, that is not a small thing. Okay, per the Sunshine Act, the dates of, and we're going to talk about this, the dates of meetings need to be advertised. Okay, so when you make that decision, that, the public needs to know that. Okay, and that deliberation needs to occur in a public setting more than likely. But, using the example that I gave, like I said, if the decision has already been made in a public setting and now you need to decide the details, that can occur outside of a public setting where an email meeting would be okay. All right, is it best practice to offer both online and in-person attendance options for the public? Yes, I would think it is. And more we're seeing this. Now, it depends on the resources that the agency has available to it. There are some first-class townships that, have tech departments that long ago, they started using C-SPAN and the like to have public channels so that their meetings can be observed on TV, and there's like a Zoom presence or some other online platform so that I can comment online, and the like. And these meetings get recorded and they're posted to websites, and that's great. But then you have some small boroughs, some small townships where they don't have the resources to do that, so they do the best they can. We've seen like Facebook, online Facebook, it's called Facebook Live meetings. You can do that, but you still need to have that physical in-person presence in order to comply with the Sunshine Act. Good question. And yeah, I would consider that a best practice to do whatever you can to facilitate the public's participation in the decision-making process. Okay, that's a good thing. All right, let's continue to move on here. What is not a meeting? Yeah, well, we talked about administrative action versus agency business, okay? If the decision has already been made in a public setting and now you're just working out the details, you don't need to have a public meeting to work out those details. Okay, and then we run into a thing called a work session. Now, it's interesting because there was just a news story about down in York County where there's debate over whether a gathering was a work session or not. let me explain what a work session is in the context of the right to know law. And school districts routinely use work sessions where they have a monthly business meeting, okay, that's open to the public, where they deliberate, where they take votes. But then they also have a monthly work session. A work session is where the board gathers to hear reports and information from staff so that they can be better informed and make educated decisions when it comes time for the next public meeting. The communication is what I would describe primarily as one way. You've got the superintendent standing up and reporting on, this is where we're at with this particular project. We've been contacted by the Department of Education. They're asking that we proceed in this particular direction, or there's been a legal case that the solicitor's going to report on or whatever. And so they're informing, they're educating the board. Now, individual board members can turn around and ask questions of the person presenting the information, and that's completely acceptable. But what they cannot do is turn to the other board member or board members present and say, well, what do you think? Because you guessed it, at that point, it becomes deliberation, and the board members cannot discuss the merits of what's being presented outside of the public eye. Now, occasionally, you'll find school districts or other bodies for that matter that will advertise it as a work session. And you heard me say advertise. They will do everything to comply with the requirements of the Sunshine Act, but they won't call it a meeting. They'll call it a work session. And then they'll turn around and have a vote during the work session. Now, there's no case law that addresses this, but I'd like to say that in my opinion, and this is not a legal opinion, you are misleading the public as to the expectations of that gathering. If I see that elected officials are having a work session, this is the definition that I follow, and it's my expectation that they're not going to be making any decisions. But because they complied with all the provisions of the Sunshine Act, their understanding is a little differently. And if they happen to take a vote, that's okay. But think about it. If I see work session, my expectation is no vote's going to take place. So I'd be curious, and again, this is that straight face test that you would explain to a judge. Why'd you call it a work session when in fact you were conducting business? Okay, I think you'd end up in trouble. Okay, but we don't have any case law that got us that far yet. So we'll see. Okay, question has popped up from Walt. Can meetings where supervisors discuss the future budget be considered work sessions? No, more than likely not, because you are deliberating. You are discussing township business in a closed, non-public setting, and I think that would be a problem. Okay. Okay, and then also you have conferences and retreats. Again, the same conditions apply. It's okay to have a quorum attend conferences and retreats. It's just that you can't discuss agency business at these gatherings, okay? Communication's one way, no deliberation, no decision-making, okay? Then if that's not occurring, then that's not a meeting, all right? But you need to be careful about any discussions that you're having, because it's real easy to cross that line from non-agency business to agency business. And that's when you're deliberating, and that's when you run the risk of being afoul of the Sunshine Act. Okay, public notice. Let's talk about the requirements. Okay, another question. Let me get a sip of coffee here real quick. My throat's getting dry. Okay, if a secretary is a supervisor and they are relaying information to other supervisors, that's okay, correct? Oh, that's a tough one. It's going to come down to which hat does the person have? Are they wearing their secretary hat or their supervisor hat? I'm just going to say you need to be very careful with that. You know, if all you're doing is relaying information, that's okay. But if you're, you know, if there are questions going back and forth, that could be a problem. Okay. And I realize this happens. You know, you've got people out there that wear multiple hats. You just need to be really careful. Okay. Yeah, that's what I'll say about that. Okay, public notice. The law requires that there be a minimum of 72 hours advance notice of the first regular meeting of the year. Okay, that's coming up. You know, usually it's the first Tuesday of the year where the various codes require that there be an organizational meeting. Okay, at least 3 days before that meeting, there needs to be public notice in a paid newspaper of general circulation that that meeting is occurring. And then typically that same notice will include the dates of all the rest of the regular meetings for the coming year. So if it's going to remain the first Tuesday of the month, it will list those particular dates that, you know, we're going to have our regular business meetings at 7 o'clock at the, you know, the township building or, you know, Borough Hall or wherever. Now, it needs to be a legal notice, okay? It cannot be like a puff piece or just a general newspaper article. And it needs to be in a paid newspaper of general circulation for that particular jurisdiction. Websites don't count, okay? Now, you can still have a notice on your website or whatever social media platforms you're using, but you still have to go back and have the newspaper legal notice as well. Those free sales circulars that show up in our mailbox 2 or 3 times a week, they don't count either. The law says paid newspaper of general circulation. Now, I realize this is becoming more and more difficult due to structural changes that are occurring in the news media. But until the law changes, this is what the requirement is. And then you have to have the notice posted at the meeting site as to when the regular meetings occur. Okay, should annual public notices of meetings be given at the beginning of the fiscal year, or does it need to be done at the start of the calendar year specifically? I think the law says beginning of the calendar year. I don't know off the top of my head. Usually, it depends on what the enabling legislation says. So when it comes to boroughs, townships, cities, and that, you go to the appropriate code, and it will say as to when the organizational meeting should be. And I believe, you know, usually the fiscal year coincides with the calendar year there as well. Okay, it's not a July to July sort of thing. It's the calendar year. But gosh, I don't want to say something that isn't accurate here. I'm gonna say check the enabling legislation, and then that will give you a guide. As a matter of fact, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think the Sunshine Act is specific because it defers to whatever the enabling legislation, the appropriate code says. So you go with the code as to when the organizational meeting is, and then the Sunshine Act just says organizational meeting at the first of the year, whether it be calendar or fiscal. Okay, good question. And I'm going to double check on that, but I'm pretty sure that's where we go. Okay, I need to roll back because you guys are answering questions or asking questions too fast here. Okay, why can't I do this? There we go. Bear with me here. I have to switch screens and roll back so I don't miss any questions. Okay, should the annual public notices of meetings be given at the beginning? Yeah, that's what I just answered. Okay, if you have a website, are meeting announcements and agendas required to be, okay, I'm going to get to agendas. Meeting announcements, there's no requirement that they be posted to websites, but let's face it, if you have a website, you might as well put up your meeting notices on there. Agendas is something a little different, and we'll get to that. Okay, is there a circulation requirement for the paper? No, it just says newspaper of general circulation. For posting, we meet at a local fire hall. Do we need to post at the township office also? We are a sewer authority. The law does not specify your business office, although again, it's probably a good idea to do so. But it does say at the meeting site. So you would need to have a meeting notice at the fire hall as part of your agreement that they're letting you meet there. Okay, I think that's how that would play out. Some of this stuff, you know, you're not going to find it in the law itself. You're not going to find case law on it. So you need to apply what I call the common sense standard. And yeah, I realize that, you know, that's very subjective, but you look at this through, yeah, Borough Code, thanks. You look at this through the eyes of the public, and what information do they need in order to meet the intent of the law? And I think posting it at the meeting site makes sense. Posting it at your business office, if you have one, makes sense. Okay. It's just, you know, you apply that common sense standard, and I think you'll be okay in the long run if someone takes you to task on it. You, again, straight face test in front of the judge. This is, you know, this is what we did because we thought it was the right thing to do. There's a very good chance that the judge would support that. Okay, if you're making a good faith effort. Okay, and then we have, yeah, language from the Borough Code. Yeah, thanks. Okay. All right, let's move on from public notice. Obviously, we're going to run over today, longer than an hour, but that's okay. There's a lot of good questions popping up here, and I haven't even got to the good part yet. Okay, public notice. We've talked about regular meetings. The law allows an agency to have a special meeting. Okay, let's say that something has come up that it cannot wait until next month. We need to act on this now. So for a special meeting, you only need 24 hours advance notice rather than 72. You still need the legal notice in the paid newspaper of general circulation. And, you know, you need to be aware of their publishing schedule and everything too, so that you get that out there in time. But you can have a special meeting as long as you adhere to the 24-hour advance notice requirement. Then you can have emergency meetings where there's no notification requirement. And I'll just run through a quick scenario here. We're a small borough. We have one snowplow. It's an old unit, and it just gave up the ghost. We can't get parts for it anymore. We can't get it repaired. We got to buy a new snowplow. And by the way, the weather forecast is calling for a foot of snow tomorrow night. Now, down the road, they've got a new plow sitting on the lot that we can go down and pick up if we vote to approve it, but we got to do it right now. We got to do it today. Okay, we're going to convene an emergency meeting of the board. All in favor, let's go do it. Okay, let's go buy the snowplow. Bona fide emergency, all right? You can do that without notification, and then after the fact, you notify the public, we had an emergency meeting where we bought a snowplow, okay? Completely legitimate. What you cannot do is create your own emergency. Okay, because again, someone files a complaint, you got to explain to a judge, you know, why you knew the snowplow broke down 3 months ago, but you waited until the forecast was bad before you decided to buy the plow sitting down on the lot. You know, if you can explain it with a straight face, good for you. If not, you know, we'll see what the judge says. And then there is no requirement for cancellations, okay? If, let's say you can't get a quorum together because somebody's sick or they're out of town or whatever, and you have to cancel the meeting, nothing in the Sunshine Act regarding notification. But let's face it, nothing gets people more upset than showing up to Borough Hall and all the lights are out, the door's locked, and they're hearing crickets, okay? And then they find out later, well, we canceled the meeting. Well, use your social media platforms to get the word out there that the meeting is canceled so that people aren't inconvenienced, okay? It's just good public service, and it's really not that hard to do. All right, now we're going to talk about agendas. And this is important today because of a recent court case that changes how we address agendas. Now, the agenda provision is about, I think, 4 years old now. That was added to the Sunshine Act after complaints about agencies voting on stuff without the public having any advance notice that they were going to vote on important stuff. So what this new provision of the Sunshine Act, 4 years ago, I guess it's new, it says all agencies must post an agenda of issues that will be deliberated on and or planned official action at least 24 hours prior to the public meeting. Now, this is entirely different from the provisions of the meeting notice itself. This is an agenda. What are they going to be talking about? What are they going to be deciding at the previously advertised public meeting? 24 hours in advance, they need to post an agenda. Okay, the agenda needs to be posted on any, if they have a website, it needs to be on the website. If they don't have a website, but let's say they have a Facebook page, it needs to be on the Facebook page or any other social media platform that they might be using for their primary source of online information to the public. They have to do this for any regular or special meeting. Obviously, they're not going to have to do it for an emergency meeting. It also needs to be posted at the agency business office, at the meeting site, and then they need to have copies of the agenda to hand out to members of the public at the physical meeting. Okay. Now, questions popped up. If an agency has multiple websites, do they need to post it on every website or just one? Well, whatever would be the primary website that they use for communicating with the public. I think that would satisfy. The law says website. Okay, so it's singular, not plural. All right, but again, my recommendation would be whatever you're using, why not post it to all of those outlets if you're able to do so? Okay, so you need to have this agenda. Now, the question comes up, how detailed does the agenda need to be? And my take on this, again, there's no case law, but when we're going to talk about executive sessions where there is case law, and that executive session decision, the language is basically you need to provide enough detail so that the public is satisfied you're doing the right thing. So when it comes to agenda items, my recommendation is to look at this from the public's perspective. You need to provide enough information so that a member of the public has a satisfactory understanding that you're doing the right thing. I admit that's subjective, but I think you kind of get the gist of it. If you just put down, pay bills, that's not enough. But if you put down, what the bills are and how much you're paying, that gives me a pretty good idea of the finances of the township and what I would expect them to be approving that night for expenses, like paying for the snowplow. Okay. So again, use common sense, look at this from the public's perspective as to how detailed your agenda should be. If you're just using code words, if you're just using abbreviations and acronyms and the like, that's probably not going to be good enough and someone will complain about it. Okay. Now, here's the important part of the agenda provisions. Changing the agenda. I want to walk you through the timeline because this is where last month there was a court case. The citation is Coleman versus Parkland, and the specific citation is on the screen right now. It changes things. Now, before the meeting, 24 hours. Okay, anything in excess of 24 hours, you can change the agenda as you see fit. Okay, but then we enter a 24-hour window where no change can occur to the agenda unless it's an emergency or it is of a de minimis level, meaning that there's no expenditure of funds. We're not going to spend any money as a result of this change, and we're not going to enter into any contracts. Okay. And that condition is in existence up to when the meeting is called to order. Now, here is where the change occurs. The Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court has said that that condition, those conditions, now extend into the meeting itself, which is different than what we said in previous trainings. Okay, in previous trainings, we said under certain conditions you can make changes. Now the Commonwealth Court is saying, no, this condition where you cannot make any changes unless they are emergency or de minimis extends through the meeting itself. Okay, you cannot make any changes to the agenda. All right, so I want to make that clear. What's in yellow there is what exists now through the meeting. Now, the current status of this case is that this is the decision of the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court. The school district, it's my understanding, has begun the paperwork to appeal before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, but that doesn't change how we currently apply the law based on the decision of the Commonwealth Court. There's no stay in place, if you will. Okay, so this is what we're going to be training on or training until we hear something differently, if the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, in fact, rules differently, or if they even decide to hear the case. Okay, this is how we will be regarding the status of the law. Now, on our website, we've posted a notice, but we're not changing the materials because of the case being under appeal. But you know, if someone calls the office or you attend Sunshine Act training that we're putting on, this is what we're saying is the law. Okay, questions have popped up here. If the meeting is solely virtual or broadcasted, which I've told you from our perspective, is not in adherence with the Sunshine Act, does the agency need to share the agenda in the chat or broadcast on its screen? I would say look at the provisions of the Sunshine Act, and it will tell you it needs to be on your website, it needs to be at the meeting site, and it needs to be at the meeting place. Okay, so if it says at the meeting place, how can you legally have a solely virtual meeting and be in compliance with the law? Okay, maybe you want to talk to your solicitor about your understanding of these virtual meetings, because I'd say you might have a problem. Okay, moving to the next question. Did you say that we have to say how much the bills are on the agenda? Well, I use that in my example only as an example of making sure that your agenda items are general enough, but I don't want to mislead you into saying that you must have the amount. Okay, I was just using that as an example. There's no legal requirement that you have the amounts on your agenda. Okay, I should, no, don't apologize. That was my mistake there if I misled you. Okay, all right, so the meeting is called to order. There are only, under this new understanding based on the case law, you can only change the agenda if there's an emergency or if it's for de minimis reasons. Now, how would you change the agenda? Well, first, the reason must be given by the chairperson. Okay, we're going to change the agenda, we're going to add this, and here are the reasons why. And then that needs to be voted on, changing the agenda. It needs to be subject to a majority vote, because when you take a vote, it gets recorded in the minutes of the meeting and it becomes a matter of public record at that point, and that record lasts forever. Okay, and then once it gets added to the agenda, then the board can deliberate on it, then they can allow public comment, and then they can take a second vote if they choose to do so, I mean, they can add an item to the agenda, deliberate on it, and they don't have to take a vote. They can decide not to do anything. But if there is a second vote, then that also gets recorded in the minutes, so it becomes a matter of public record. Okay, does this all apply for removing items from the agenda too? Well, yes, you are changing the agenda as to whether you're adding or subtracting from the agenda. Okay. Um, yeah. Okay. So that's how that would work with making any changes to the agenda during, before or during the meeting. Okay, and like I said at the final point, the minutes must reflect the change because that becomes a matter of public record as to how the board addressed the changes to the agenda. Okay, I think I've pretty well exhausted that and the changes that have come about as a result of the Parkland decision. So let's move on. Public comment, the third leg of the stool. Okay, the public has a right to comment on matters that are or may be before the board during these public sessions. The board can limit comments to residents and taxpayers for the jurisdiction that the board is responsible for. Someone comes in from out of town and they want to address the board during public comment period, the board can say no. You know, if you're not a resident or a taxpayer, we're not going to allow you. Now, someone might say, well, I pay state taxes, I pay federal taxes, I'm a taxpayer. Well, no, you're not, as far as the Sunshine Act is concerned. You have to live in the township, you have to live in the borough, you have to be a resident within the jurisdiction of the water authority, whatever. Okay, that's how that works. Then it says they have a right to comment on issues that are or may be before the board before any pertinent vote takes place. Okay, now that word may is somewhat problematic because, you know, the board has an agenda and this is what we want to conduct business on, so this is what you should comment on. No, because that word may is in there, if somebody wants to comment on, you know, the fact that there's a lot of potholes on their street, even though you're not discussing potholes, they can do that. Now, the board can establish some reasonable rules for public comment. Usually it's like time limits, you know, everybody gets 3 minutes. You can, if you want to, you can ask for a spokesman to be, let's say you've got some big item that you're going to be voting on tonight, and a bunch of people show up, they're all wearing the same t-shirts, and they all sign up for public comment. Well, you can pretty well guess you're going to hear a lot of the same comments over and over again. There's nothing, absolutely nothing preventing the chairperson from going to that group and saying, look, how about you guys appoint a spokesperson? And rather than 3 minutes, we'll give you 10 minutes. That way, everything will get covered. We won't be here all night. There won't be a lot of repetition. And, you know, you'll have your say. And you can do that. Usually, these provisions, these reasonable provisions, are either established in like the rules of order, like Robert's Rules of Order, and those rules have a provision that allow you to set the rules aside. You can do that. You can do that as long as you're meeting the spirit of the Sunshine Act, which is to give everyone a say. Okay. And then you can, this is something that we define as a best practice. This is not a requirement of the Sunshine Law, but what we're seeing more and more of are specific versus general comment periods. Okay. So at the beginning of the meeting, or as you entertain each agenda item, you would have a specific comment period. You can comment, but it has to be about what we're getting ready to vote on. Okay. And then at the end of the evening, we open it up for general public comments, where the guy who's complaining about the potholes, now he's getting his day in court. Okay, he can stand up and point fingers and do whatever he wants to do. Okay, but that occurs at the end of the night. All right, and more we're seeing this happen, and it seems to work. So maybe you want to take a look at this as a possible solution or way to conduct business. I do want to repeat, though, this is not a requirement of the Sunshine Act. It's simply a best practice that more and more municipalities are doing. Okay, is there any case law on comment periods related to citizens trying to speak but constantly gets interrupted? No case law, but I think you'll find that, well, there's language in the law itself that, if someone is getting interrupted, you know what? I think there may be some case law, but it's federal case law. This goes back 1 or 2 years where there were some school districts who, if during public comment, you've ventured off topic, at least in the understanding of the school district, they would cut you off. Okay. They would basically say your comments are not relevant to the subject, and we are thus ending your comments. You're not allowed to speak anymore. Now, that was appealed, but not as a violation of the Sunshine Act, but rather as a constitutional free speech issue. I'm not sure where that case stands right now. It was down in the Philly area. And it went back to the whole, I'm drawing a blank right now, but it dealt with, some of the issues that school districts were facing public outcry over. And there was a lot of discord in the school district. So people were getting up and they wanted to talk about this issue. The solicitor was basically cutting people off. That's not what we're talking about, or you're not allowed to use that phrase, okay? So you're not allowed to speak anymore. It got appealed to the federal court, and the initial decision said that the school district was violating the commenter's right to free speech, and that was in violation of the Constitution, the First Amendment rights. Now, I'm not sure whether that ever got appealed, and if it did get appealed, I'm not sure where that stands. So it's not, if you're being cut off during public comment or interrupted, it's not case law for the Sunshine Act, it's a First Amendment right. The school district was down in the Philly area, and one of the people cut off was Simon Campbell. He's the one, and others took it to federal court. So you want to Google him. He has his own YouTube channel, and I think you may find information on there. And there would probably be contact information where you could reach out to Mr. Campbell. I haven't had any contact with him in years, but I think that's probably your best source. And I wish I could think of the school district name. It was one of the suburban Philadelphia districts. Okay, hopefully that helps you out there. Okay, so if a committee offers the public to submit public comment ahead of the meeting, oh, hold on here. Comments are scrolling and I'm just missed that one. Okay, if a committee offers the public to submit public comment ahead of the meeting, should those be shared in the minutes or with the public during the meeting? Okay, Nora, you have touched on a subject that is near and dear to me. Most municipalities regard public comment as a matter of the public record. I do not, but I'm not an attorney, and this is not a legal opinion. It's simply my reading of the Sunshine Act. It's not so much what the act says, it's what the act doesn't say. And it uses different descriptors for public comment versus public testimony. Okay, and in my opinion, there is a difference. The law says that anyone providing public testimony, that information needs to be incorporated into the minutes. The law does not use the word public comment. Okay, it uses public comment in a different context. So my take on it is that you need to distinguish between public comment or public testimony, where someone is typically sworn in, versus public comment, which the public has a right to make. Okay, it's two different things. Most municipalities do not treat it as two different things. I'm in the minority here. As a matter of fact, I think I'm the only one. So you do what you think is right, because a court has never ruled on this, and don't regard anything I say as a legal opinion. All right, but take a look at the nuances of the law, and this is where I focus on definitions and how we define what is comment, what is testimony. I think they're two different things. Most people that have to administer the right or the Sunshine Law do not. But that's a subject for another day, and probably uh, take up much more time than we have available here. Okay. Next question. If the township has moved official public participation comment time to the end of the meeting, if I understand this correctly, they must allow the public to comment before action on each individual agenda item if the public would want to comment. Well, yeah, they don't need to have comment period specifically before each agenda item, although I think that would be a sensible thing to do, but they must allow public comment before they take the vote, okay? Whether it be a combined comment period or individual comment periods. Okay, Nikki, thank you. Pennsbury School District. It was on the tip of my brain, but I couldn't think about it. Yeah, and someone else is bringing it up. Yeah, Simon Campbell, Pennsylvania School Boards. That's it. And it dealt with the Pennsbury School District. Okay, excellent. You will see some interesting YouTube videos out there that will raise your eyebrows when you see what happened that led to that court case about interrupting people during public comment period. Okay, it really, well, I'll just leave it at that. I probably shouldn't put in my personal views any further. During the public comment period, is the board required to answer questions? Well, no, they are not. They're not required to. But, depending on the circumstances, it just might be easier for them to do that. I mean, you don't want to put yourself in the position of debating, and you may want to rely on the advice of your solicitor when it comes to specific, discourse with commenters. But, it's going to be case specific. Would this be an appropriate time to set the record straight? So I'm going to address this person's comments. Or if they're asking questions, it may be, it's not appropriate for us to answer your questions right now, but we'll get back to you. It's just going to depend. But there's nothing in the Sunshine Act that requires you to answer questions. I'll just say that, it may be good public policy to answer questions. It's just going to depend. There are two questions prior to Nora's that you just answered. Okay, good. If we only had time, would love to dissect. Yeah, okay. Oh, it was settled for 300K. Okay, I did not know that. Okay, I have not had the opportunity to follow up on that. I think I'm at the end of the current comments, hopefully, or current questions. All right, didn't know that. 300K settlement. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's move on. Okay. I think we've covered public comment. Okay, I think we've exhausted that. So I'm going to switch back over to this screen and try to advance. Yep. Okay, executive sessions. Let's cover that because this comes up a lot. Now, executive sessions are meetings of the board that can occur outside of the public setting, but only for specific reasons, which we'll talk about. Usually it's, something sensitive or inherently confidential in nature. Now, they can be held before, during, or after the actual public open meeting, or they can be announced at a public meeting that we're going to have an executive session at a future time. All right. Now, the complete reason as to why you're going into executive session has to be given. And this is where this case law comes into place that I was referring to earlier. The case citation is, well, not citation, but the case title is Reading, City of Reading versus the Reading Eagle, which is the local newspaper in Berks County. What was happening is that city council would meet and the chairperson would stand up and say, we're going into executive session for personnel reasons. Well, the Reading Eagle said that's not good enough, and they took them to court. The case came out of the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court, where they provided some useful language where essentially they said just giving the reason, abbreviated reason, is not good enough. You need to provide enough of a reason so that the public is satisfied you're doing it for the right thing. Now, again, that's subjective, and maybe you want to read this case because they cite the fact that when you go into executive session, you are in essence saying that the Sunshine Act, your rights, no longer apply. So you need to give enough of a reason to the public that they are satisfied you're no longer exercising their rights is the requirement to, well, that's what I'm talking about right now, okay? You must announce that you're going into executive session and give the reasons why you're going into executive session, okay, in order to satisfy any doubt that the public may have that you're doing it for the right reasons. So if I say personnel reasons, that's not good enough, but I might have to say, we need to discuss a possible rules violation where we've been asked as to whether or not it's appropriate to suspend an employee for a week. Okay. So we're going to go into executive session to discuss this. Okay. That tells me, okay, it is a personnel decision and you're giving me enough information that I know it's a valid personnel decision that the board has to make. Now, there's no requirement that a board take minutes during an executive session. But if they do, those minutes are exempt from the right to know law, under the right to know law. They're not a matter of public record. Now, no official action can take place during an executive session. The board can deliberate. Remember, you can talk about what you need to do that could lead to a vote. And you can informally poll the board. Okay, well, what do you think, Fred? What do you think, Sam? What do you think, Mary? But any official action, the actual vote to suspend the employee, must take place in a public setting in order for it to be considered official business. Okay, no vote during an executive session. You would adjourn the executive session, come out into regular session, and then vote on what you deliberated about during executive session. All in favor of approving the suspension of XYZ employee, signify by saying aye, and then it becomes a matter of the official public record. Okay, that's how that would work. Now, more questions have popped up here. That's okay. Let's answer them a while. Okay. If an executive session is on the agenda for interview of future employee, can they come out of that executive session and then vote on hiring the person without the hiring being on the agenda? That, I think I've explained that, Walt. That's going to be subjective. Did you have enough information to understand why they were going into executive session? If you are satisfied, then no problem. If you're not satisfied, you have the right to file a complaint about that. Do complete reasons need to be announced before, or can the complete reasons be announced after executive session? They can be announced after executive session because depending on the circumstances, they may not completely know why they're going into executive session, and I will explain how that could occur in this next slide that we're going to go to. And these are the reasons for going into an executive session. Personnel matters like hiring, firing, or discipline. Okay, now the personnel decision must involve specific individuals or specific positions. It cannot be about general policy. Okay, if you're going into executive session to discuss hiring policies, that's a problem. If you're going into executive session to discuss hiring for a specific position, that's okay. Okay, you need to be able to make that discernment, that to distinguish between the two. Discussing labor negotiations. You've got a union shop. It's coming up for contract renewal. You need to discuss labor strategy. Yeah, you do that in executive session. You don't do that in public. Considering the purchasing, leasing, or selling of property. You can do that in executive session. Now, the law says only purchasing or leasing. It doesn't say selling, but there is a Commonwealth Court unpublished decision where they said selling is okay too. Consult with counsel about litigation. Someone has filed a lawsuit against the borough, and we need to discuss our legal strategy with our solicitor. So we're going to, here's the case citation. It's been filed in the Commonwealth, or I'm sorry, the Common Pleas Court. So we need to discuss, we can't say just discuss litigation. This is the litigation that we're going to discuss, okay? And give the Commonwealth, or yeah, I keep saying Commonwealth, give the court Common Pleas citation. And that way you'll know that it's a real court case. Avoiding violating privilege or confidentiality. Okay, here's where your question comes into play. We're having a public meeting and our solicitor's there. One of the board members makes a comment. Our solicitor's eyes get real big and he says, we need to go into executive session right now. And it is to discuss avoiding violating confidentiality, because this council person, okay, you're not going to say this in public, but we're going to go into executive session. We need to do this right now to consult with counsel, okay? And once they get into executive session, the solicitor says, you can't say that. You need to stop that comment because you're violating confidentiality. And it could be, who knows, it could be a confidentiality clause in a labor agreement or, something else that's going on. Okay, so then they come out of executive session and then you give the full reason why you went into executive session. It was because we risked violating a confidentiality clause in a specific contract. So we had to cut off discussion, and I needed to, our counsel needed to notify us of that reason. Okay. All right, let me back up. More questions coming in. Okay, complaint filed with the OR? No, and I will explain what happens. Does that now change with the new case law of adding an item to the agenda, hiring of the new person? No, the case law only involves changing the agenda. There's nothing in the case law involving how specific agenda items need to be. And the case law does not address anything with executive sessions. Okay, the case law only involves the Parkland decision, involves changes to the agenda that can be made during the public meeting. Okay, that's where we're at. Okay, where was I? Yeah, violating privilege, discussing university admission standards. I wasn't around in the 1950s when they wrote the law. I don't know why it's there, but it is. Discussing emergency preparedness, newer provision, anything dealing with Homeland Security, emergency evacuation routes, maybe other evacuation plans and the like. If it involves emergency preparedness, you can discuss that in executive session. Okay, I need to get back to this screen. Advance. Here we go. Okay, question came up about violations. What if you think there's a violation to the Sunshine Act? If it occurs, if you're at a public meeting, a member of the public may respectfully stand up and address the board at any time during that meeting and say, I believe you have violated the Sunshine Act. Okay. They've met their obligation that they feel they need to do so. They can do that at any time during the meeting. They are not out of order. Okay. Now, the question comes up, well, what if they get belligerent or whatever? That's a separate issue. Okay. But they're allowed to bring to the board's attention what they believe to be a violation of the Sunshine Act. Now, what if the board agrees? What if they say, hey, you know what? You're right. We forgot to vote on this, or we should have voted on this during public session and we only discussed it during executive session, so we're going to vote on it now. Okay. The board can cure its own violations. Okay. No harm, no foul. Someone brings it to their attention, or they suddenly realize, oops, wait a minute. We're going to take a vote now that'll cure this violation. Okay. And that's fine. They can do that. Okay. But what if they disagree with the perceived violation? What if they say, oh, no, we're allowed to do this? And, thanks for bringing it to our attention, but no thanks. Sit down. We're going to keep on going. All right. Well, that person has the right within 30 days to file a complaint if it's a local agency with their county court of common pleas, if it's a state agency with the Commonwealth Court. The Office of Open Records has no legal jurisdiction over the Sunshine Act. Statutorily, we provide training and guidance, and that's what I'm doing here now. All right. And if you were to call our office, we would provide guidance, but we do not have any legal authority. Okay. So you would go to the court and you would seek legal relief, and that would depend on whatever whatever you want. You could say, I want the court to void actions that are taken. I just want an investigation, whatever. Now, if you believe that there's some sort of criminal culpability, you could ask the district attorney to also investigate. The district attorney can only rule on the criminal aspects of the complaint. They cannot rule on a Sunshine Act violation. Only the judge can do that. Now, if the judge, usually what they'll do, if they decide there's enough, evidence here to proceed further, they usually conduct a hearing. This is where that straight face test comes into play. Okay, and they'll hear the parties out. If they agree that there's a violation of the Sunshine Act, they have great leeway in what they can do as far as any sanctions. It could just be a slap on the wrist. They could say, yes, there was a Sunshine Act violation, don't do it again. They could void a vote. They could say, this vote doesn't count. They could void an entire meeting, which I have seen done. And if it's particularly egregious, they could levy fines against the members of the board who they believe were in violation. Okay, the fines are not paid by the agency. The fines are paid by the individual board members. And an agency cannot cover the costs for the board members. It comes out of their pockets. It's $1,000, up to $1,000 for the first violation, up to $2,000 for the second violation. Now, I can't remember in recent history any monetary sanctions, but it's still possible. In recent years, there has been more legal activity on the Sunshine Act. I think it's post-COVID. People just got more interested in local government, and we've seen more and more cases being filed. We had a couple cases where the remedy, the sanction, well, it's not really a sanction, but the remedy that the judge ordered or recommended was for the members of the board to get Sunshine Act training. And they were referred to us, and we provided training for that board. And then we sent a letter to the judge affirming that they have now satisfied the terms of the settlement or the judge's order. So judges are getting creative in how they're dealing with the Sunshine Act. Don't think that you can get away with just your wrist being slapped. It seems as we're seeing more and more activity, we're seeing higher levels of sanctions as well. Okay, questions have popped up. Is it a standard civil lawsuit, meaning all the same rules? Well, different counties have different rules, and different counties are also have different levels of knowledge on the Sunshine Act. In some cases, it comes down to a matter of educating a judge on what the law says and what the relevant case law is. Their clerks will do a lot of work on that, but some counties just don't see a lot of activity when it comes to the Sunshine Act. So it's a matter of education. There was one in the last couple of years, just read about it yesterday, but don't remember which. Oh, finding bad faith. Yeah, that's open records request. That's not Sunshine Act. The one that I was referring to with training, most recent one I can think of, actually there may have been some since then, is Monessen. Okay, that's where the judge, I think the judge affirmed a settlement between the party where that led to the training. Okay, and like I said, there's been a couple since then. Secretaries, admins can be fined personally as well. That part, I don't think so. I think it's just the public officials, the elected officials in that case, that can be fined under the Sunshine Act. But I would have to look that up to be 100% sure on that. Maybe you want to do it, download the law, and read that section on sanctions toward the end. I'll do that as well, but I think it's only public officials. Okay. Moving on. Yeah, we're at the pretty close to the end of the presentation here, just some miscellaneous stuff. Okay, the minutes of public meetings are a matter of public records. The minutes must reflect which board members attended. Now, if there is a vote, usually it's just recorded as motion carried, motion denied. But if there is a polling of the individual members for a vote, which, you know, happens every now and then, if that occurs, then the individual votes must be recorded in the minutes. Okay, which public officials voted for, which public officials voted against. The public can record public meetings, and they don't have to let anybody know that they're doing so. It's not a violation of the Sunshine Act. It's not a violation of the Pennsylvania wiretap law. I can set my cell phone on record, put it in my pocket, walk into the public meeting, and I am not violating the law by recording that meeting. What I would recommend is at the beginning of the public meeting, when the chairperson is making their announcements, they would include that there's no expectation of privacy in a public meeting, and it's very well possible that your comments in this meeting is being recorded. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And as a matter of fact, if the agency is recording the meeting, which many do, you know, they record the meeting for purposes of minutes and they stream or whatever. If they're doing that, that video, that audio is a public record under the right to know law until those records are destroyed. Okay, as long as the agency has them in their possession, it's a public record, and I can file a right to know request and get a copy of those recordings. And the minutes, obviously the minutes are public records. Okay, questions have popped up. I gotta scroll back up here, missed a couple. Okay, the presentation attached to the webinar invite dated 1/1/22. Yeah, there are some differences. It involves the agenda slide. And yes, I think the version on the website will be updated within the next couple days. I just made, within the last couple days, I made the changes to the presentation PowerPoint, which is on a different computer than the website. I actually notified the administrative staff of those changes, and they're going to come around and more than likely make sure that the one on the website gets updated with the change as a result of the Parkland decision. Our local county holds their meetings in the courthouse with a court order saying no recording in the building. Does the Sunshine Act override the court order? I don't know. That's a good question. I would be interested to find out. Why don't you give it a try and see what happens? If I were told that I can't record a public meeting, I would, you know, I'd cite this provision in the Sunshine Act and see what their reaction is. Agency recordings. My understanding was that after minutes are approved, recordings can be recorded over. That is accurate, depending on the agency and how they choose to proceed. There is a law in Pennsylvania called the Municipalities Records Act, where it says recordings should be maintained for as long as administratively necessary or for 30 days. And I think if not 30 days, until the next regular meeting. Okay. Now, if the agency chooses to adhere to the Municipal Records Act, then that's what they would follow. If they don't have to follow the Records Act, like school districts don't have to follow it, they can destroy that recording whenever they feel necessary. But if they have it in their possession, if they haven't recorded over, if they haven't deleted it, if they haven't destroyed it, then it is a public record subject to access under the under the right to know law. Is it legal to require residents to state in public who is recording? No. No requirement that they announce that they are recording. How soon after a meeting can I destroy the recording? I just answered that question. Thanks for updating the changes. You are welcome. And like I said, they're going to remain in yellow until we have some idea as to where the Supreme Court is headed. Number one, do they decide to hear the case? Number two, if they hear the case, how are they going to rule on it? And then what will that ruling be? Okay, so it's evolving, and we'll let everybody know what the status is as we move ahead. Are draft meeting minutes public documents that may be requested by the public for review? Well, you can request it, but there are provisions within the right to know law. And, you know, we're getting off topic here, but since you're saying meeting minutes, it's kind of related. If it is a draft document, it can be withheld under the right to know law. Take a look at the exemptions within the right to know law under section 708B, and you'll find one that deals with draft documents. So the agency can withhold them. Okay, if a public records request is made before the recordings are destroyed, they have to be maintained. Yes. Okay, you can't get a public, you cannot get an open records request for a record and then turn around and destroy it. Okay, that could be constituted as bad faith. Could. Okay, it's similar to what's called a legal hold, where if it becomes a matter of a legal proceeding, and filing a right to know request is a legal proceeding, then you don't do anything to destroy that record. And there is case law that supports that. Can it be requested to have the recordings or just listen to it? Yeah, you can do one or the other. Although, you know, if you request to listen to the recording, you cannot have access to an agency computer. That's in the right to know law. So if they put it, how can we do this? I would say just request the recording, okay, and have them email it to you or have them put it on a flash drive. We're kind of getting off into the weeds here, but they do have the right not to give you access to a computer. And if they have a recording, more than likely, that's how you would have access. So if you requested to inspect the record by listening to the recording, and the only way to listen to it is by computer, they can deny your request. All right. If you could guess, what are the top 3 violations of the Sunshine Act? Okay. I am guessing, Nora. Misuse of executive sessions, where things are discussed in private that should not be discussed. Next would be illegal meetings, where you have gatherings that aren't advertised, and the agency is really conducting business outside of the public eye. And that's a hard one because, you know, how do you prove that they're meeting in secret? But yet we see references and allusions to, like if a board has a public meeting and they say, and now we're going to vote on agenda item 3 without any discussion. Well, how do they know how to vote? Okay. So there had to be discussions taking place, which is deliberations that should have occurred in a public eye. You know, you see that. And it's like, duh, you know, do you think we're stupid? But okay, I got to be careful how I word all this. Okay, that would be number 2. Number 3, I think, is where we get into the world of online meetings, which is something new, where I think that there are certain organizations out there that believe you can have meetings without a public presence. And we saw that with some of the comments earlier. Our position here in the office is that if you're having a public meeting, there must be a physical presence. Okay. But yet there are some organizations that disagree with that. And until it gets definitively decided on by a court, there's going to be this disagreement. Okay, so that would be my top three. That's an interesting question. Never had that one before. Okay. Thank you for the updates. You're welcome. You're welcome. Can you use artificial intelligence to produce meeting minutes by publishing the summary and transcript? Okay. I don't know. That would be my answer because I don't know enough of what artificial intelligence can be. I think it's going to depend on the end product. Does the end product, regardless of how it's produced, represent what is commonly understood to be meeting minutes? For instance, there are some agencies that mistakenly believe a recording is a satisfactory meeting minutes, and a transcript would be meeting minutes. That is not accurate. Meeting minutes are basically an organized summary of all the matters of official business that took place. Okay, a transcript is not. A recording is not. But using AI, if it can produce what everyone is satisfied, what meeting minutes should look like, then maybe you're okay. But I'm just speculating here. Please understand that. Um, and, you know, I like to think I'm up on tech, but AI is just so new that, yeah, I am guessing, Walt. You are right. Okay, moving on. I'm very patient. Well, sometimes. Uh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, I'm great. I used to be. Um, Moving on. What capacity does the public have pertaining to involvement in board deliberations? Yeah, your rights are public comment. Okay. Witnessing deliberations and not specifically involved in the conversation. Yeah, you have the right to public comment. You do not have a right to inject yourself into the conversation. I'd say if that's a problem for you, run for office. We can do that. Okay. Yeah, I have covered everything. I'm going to go over here and go to the next slide, which is our final slide. And if there are any more questions popping in here, and there are, get them in now. But in the meantime, take a look at this last slide, which lists a lot of resources available for you. You know what I'm about to say. This is the best government website you'll ever encounter. Okay, it is updated 6 days a week with new information, new decisions, um, new case law, new training opportunities. You can subscribe to our Twitter feed. Every morning we'll wake you up between 7 and 8 o'clock with a tweet that gives you all the information that you need to know about government transparency. Resources for contacting us. And like I said at the beginning of the presentation, feel free to reach out to us with any questions you have. We cannot give you legal advice, but we will get you steered in the right direction. Okay, questions popping up here. Are there any other methods to submit Sunshine Act violations beside court or attorney general? No. You would seek legal relief from the appropriate court having common jurisdiction, which would be your county court of common pleas for a local agency or the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court for a state agency. There is no agency having enforcement authority for the Sunshine Act. Okay. You, as a member of the public, have that authority in your ability to file a complaint with the courts. Yep. Thank you, Walt, for answering that question. That is accurate. Okay. I think we're at the end, folks. I want to thank you for all of your questions. It's been a good session, and you've kept me on my toes here. I'm going to do some research in response to some of these questions for the next time this comes up. But everybody, have a great week, and we hope to see you in 2 weeks when we're doing, well, I'm not sure. I have to look at the holiday schedule, but usually it would be in 2 weeks that I'll be back. If not, we'll be back next year. Okay, but everybody have great holidays if we don't have a chance to talk to you before then. Okay, we're signing off. Take care, everyone.